Women remain underrepresented in Canadian politics at all levels of government. Though Canada elected a record number of women members of parliament in 2019, progress has been slow given that women first earned the right to vote and run for public office in 1918. Further, progress is uneven among women. Black, Indigenous, and racialized women, for example, continue to be underrepresented in Canadian politics relative to white women. In 1997, Canada ranked 16th in the world on rankings of women's political representation. By 2020, however, Canada's ranking had slipped to 58th, according to the Inter-Parliamentary Union's list ranking the percentage of women in parliaments worldwide. The World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index measures gaps in gender equality around the world according to 4 factors: economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. From this perspective, political empowerment is considered one measure of women's overall levels of empowerment and equality. Canada ranks 19th on the 2020 Global Gender Gap Rankings and 25th when it comes to political empowerment. The 2020 Global Gender Gap Study finds that progress worldwide towards closing the political empowerment gap is slow. In 2019, Canadians elected a record 98 women to the House of Commons, which means women comprise 29% of the seats in the House of Commons. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has demonstrated a commitment to appointing women to cabinet where they can have a say in crucial decisions. Yet, since the Right Honourable Kim Campbell served as Prime Minister in 1993, Canada has not had a woman as its head of government. Further, in 2020, none of Canada's provincial premiers are women, and women continue to be underrepresented as mayors and city councillors. In Alberta, for example, women comprise around 30% of city councillors and 19% of mayors. In their 2013 book, Doctors Linda Trimble, Jane R. Scott, and Manon Tremblay argue that the project of reaching gender parity in politics has stalled. In this lesson, I'll present the reasons that women continue to be underrepresented in Canadian politics and some potential solutions. The first barrier to women's equal representation in politics is money. The Government of Alberta reports that women's average after-tax income is approximately $33,000, whereas men earn, on average, approximately $54,000. Women earn 39.4% less than men on average. On a national scale, women earn approximately $28,000 after taxes, which is 29.4% lower than men who earn around $40,000 on average. Income acts as a barrier to women's equal participation in politics because, quite simply, it costs money to run a campaign and it often requires time off work. Income is a more significant barrier when campaign financing is unregulated, which means there might be no spending or donation limits, and candidates can rely on their own personal income and finances to fund a campaign. At the federal level, campaign finance regulation, putting spending limits on campaigns and donations, helps offset the influence of money as a barrier to women's equal representation. Another barrier is childcare. Women report that they perceive their childcare and family responsibilities to be a barrier to their entry into politics, or something that might stop them from participating. This is related to the double day, which refers to women's disproportionate share of childcare and domestic responsibilities. In 2018, for example, Statistics Canada reported that women and men between the ages of 25 and 54 work similar hours of paid labor per day, but women spend 1.5 hours per day more than men on unpaid domestic labor. This acts as a barrier to women's participation in politics because of a perceived lack of time to dedicate to a political career. Psychology and women's own perceptions of their political knowledge or competence can also act as a barrier. Research in the field of political psychology has found that men tend to report being more confident in their political knowledge or abilities, making them more likely to run for office. According to Dr. Carolyn Heldman, an American political scientist, children learn by the time they are teenagers that the office of the U.S. president is a man's role. When little children are asked, for example, if they want to be president, there are no significant gender differences in their responses. But by the time they're age 15 or so, however, researchers note significant gender differences, with girls being less likely to say yes. These psychological barriers are related to stereotypes, which associate political leadership with masculinity. Given this implicit association of political leadership with masculine traits or characteristics, women are often perceived as not man enough for the job. But these kinds of stereotypes are also used to critique men politicians. For example, in the 2015 election, Conservative Party of Canada attack ads implied that Justin Trudeau was perhaps too feminine to be a good prime minister. One of the critiques often leveled at Justin Trudeau is that he used to be a drama teacher, a career not perceived to be good preparation for politics. The concentration of women in fields like nursing and teaching, careers not considered relevant for politics, is a barrier since most politicians tend to come from the fields of business and law. Changing the perception that fields like nursing, childcare, and education are not relevant for politics could help remove this barrier. After all, education and healthcare account for a huge proportion of government budgets. Political scientists have also identified political parties as perhaps one of the biggest barriers to women's equal political representation. And there are two reasons for this. First, political parties are more likely to select women to lead the parties when the party is in a period of crisis or decline. This is known as the glass cliff. Second, political parties are more likely to nominate men in safe or winnable ridings. And women tend to be nominated as sacrificial lambs, nominated in ridings where the party has no chance of winning. So unless parties are willing to nominate women in winnable ridings, it's unlikely that women's political representation will increase. Political scientists have also identified news media as a barrier to women's equal representation. Overwhelming evidence shows that journalists are more likely to discuss women's personal lives and appearances, thereby diminishing their credibility. Researchers have dubbed the overemphasis on women's looks as the lipstick watch. They argue that an emphasis on women's appearances depicts them as abnormal or novel in the political realm. Political communication scholars have also found that some elite women politicians, notably Belinda Stronach in Canada and Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin in the United States, have been sexualized in media portrayals, depicted through a pornographic gaze. There is no evidence, in the Canadian context at least, that voters are more likely to vote for men over women. So voters' attitudes are not a barrier for women's equal representation. However, there is evidence that proportional representation electoral systems tend to elect more women. Unlike our single member system in Canada, wherein we elect one person per riding, many proportional representation systems have multi-member districts, which enable parties to nominate more candidates. And when parties nominate more candidates, they're more likely to nominate women. Women in Canadian politics have long reported verbal and sexual harassment as an issue. In 1990, the harassment of women parliamentarians was so bad that a group of women MPs made the unprecedented move of working together across party lines to form the Association of Women Parliamentarians to combat sexism in the House of Commons. In 2018, Alberta newspaper headlines reported the pervasiveness and frequency of death threats directed at then Premier Rachel Notley. In a 5-month period, for example, Notley was the target of 19 threats, 3 of which were deemed serious enough that the police had to intervene. There are potential solutions to the problem of women's underrepresentation in politics. First, Melanie Thomas suggests that campaign schools, which provide training for women considering running for office, can help women feel more confident in their ability to influence politics. Second, political parties can adopt better policies and procedures for ensuring that they nominate equal numbers of men and women in winnable ridings. Third, parties and legislatures can develop better policies to stop sexual assault and harassment in politics. Finally, research suggests that reforming the electoral system has the potential to increase the representation of women and marginalized groups.